Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between. Welcome to another episode of How to Rock Astrology. It's a pleasure to be hanging out with you today. My name is Dustin Cormier, and I'm very glad to be doing this particular video today. I've got a lot planned. I've got a big presentation to move through, so feel free to hang out with me, and I hope you guys enjoy what I have in stock today. In particular, we're going to be talking about Pluto and Aquarius. Now, I decided to make this a little bit of a teaser because we are not going to be getting into all the 12 rising signs in this session. Today, we are just going to be talking about an introduction to the overarching themes that I see happening with this present system of transits that's kind of happening right now. So, thank you so much, as usual, to everyone who's hanging out with me today. Now, before I start, I would just like to announce that my teacher, RYAN KURCZAK'S, has another yearly Asheville Vedic Astrology apprenticeship program happening. So this is the course that I took in order to gain the knowledge that I have, and this is my boy Ryan. So for everybody who's interested in getting my tropical-based Vedic astrology knowledge, check out his channel, RYAN KURCZAK'S. He's got a sweet little introduction to the course on there, and I highly recommend it. Like I said, it's got me to where I am today. Now, without further ado, folks, Pluto in Aquarius is the big buzz happening in the astrology world right now. Many astrologers hack at this from different angles. It is at some level, we could just think of what is Pluto in Aquarius? What does Pluto mean, and how does it interact with Aquarius? Now, one of the things that I find kind of important to say is that Pluto, while it is typically classically aligned with Scorpio, and that's what people say about it, is that it rules, or is a secondary ruler of Scorpio, and it contains scorpionic tones. While I could see this being the case, just like Uranus has Aquarian tones and Pisces has, Neptune has Piscean tones, you don't always want to jump right into the injunction that Pluto is completely scorpionic, because the outer planets go beyond the chakras. The chakras in the Indian system are always conveyed to be something that it's really its own thing. And this is a picture I often like to show to kind of describe exactly what I mean by this. We can see that this is the sun's influence between Capricorn and Cancer, and the sun is moving through the chakras of the earth throughout the year. From Capricorn to Cancer, it's going up the chakras, and then from Cancer to Capricorn, it's going down the chakras. You can see this here, right? The winter solstice is Aquarius, and then it goes Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer. This is Saturn. These little suns and moons just mean male and female. So Aquarius is anciently ruled by Saturn. Pisces is anciently ruled by Jupiter. Then we have Mars for Aries at the 3rd chakra. Venus for Taurus at the 4th chakra. Gemini and Mercury at the 5th chakra. And then Cancer and the moon at the 6th chakra. The royal luminaries, the sun, Leo, and the moon, Cancer, rule the 6th chakra. And then from Leo, that's after the summer solstice, from Leo, the spirit goes towards manifestation, and that's Capricorn, from the 6th chakra to the 1st chakra, right? Leo is the 6th chakra, Mercury and Virgo at the 5th chakra, the throat chakra, Libra, the heart, at the 4th chakra. Virgo and Mercury are the 5th chakra. Libra and Venus are the 4th chakra. Scorpio mutually rules Mars with Aries. That's the 3rd chakra, the solar plexus. Jupiter rules Sagittarius and Pisces. It's the second chakra. And then Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius. This is the first chakra. This, to me, is a very important way of conveying what the chakras are. And so we can see that in spring, from Aquarius to Cancer, we're going from the winter to the summer solstice, from the first chakra all the way up to the sixth chakra. And then after that, we have the fall, where Leo, the spirit, moves towards manifestation in Capricorn. Now, as for, these planets all make sense, but Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, I would convey that they don't necessarily correlate with any of these signs or these chakras. Rather, they are their own sort of celestial agents of transcendental and spiritual evolution that exist beyond the rings of the traditional chakras. So I think that this is an important way to consider what exactly it is that we're thinking about when we're referring to the outer planets and what is really kind of happening with Pluto. Because Pluto is really very much its own sort of thing going on. So wherever Pluto is going, we have to consider it as not necessarily it's interacting with whatever chakra it's at. In this case, Pluto has been interacting with Capricorn, the root chakra. So this is where my presentation kind of starts. With this video, I'm planning to talk about how Pluto is in Capricorn right now, and it's moving towards Aquarius. It's coming from the root chakra of materialism up to the sixth chakra, up to the higher spheres. And that's why Pluto coming into Aquarius does represent it. Because when Pluto is in Leo, going all the way down to Capricorn, it was spirit moving into manifestation. And eventually we lose the sense of spirit. Now Pluto in Aquarius is bringing the power into the individual. And individual sovereignty, individual power is a big part of what Pluto in Aquarius means and what we're going to be talking about as we move through this. Now, at the very end, or throughout this presentation, I'm going to be showing these very critical themes. In fact, I'm going to show a little bit now just to start getting our whistles wet here. This is my depiction of the dissemination of systemic sovereignty and power on planet Earth as it has been thus far. Now, mind you, this is from my sort of North American point of view. Before the 1400s, God and the Church and the Vatican kind of ruled things, and this is really the medieval Dark Ages. Around the 1500s, there started to be kingships that were more important than God and the Vatican. And there was this divine right of kings that King Henry VIII instituted. And it's something I'm going to kind of talk about in this presentation. And this was around this era. Now, in the mid-1700s, there was lots of warring. Technology was getting better. And England, France, Portugal, and Spain were all fighting for territory. And this is where America, North America, came and established itself out of the womb of Britain. This is the 1700s when America was born. Now, all of these big changes happened when Pluto came into Capricorn and Aquarius. When Pluto comes into Capricorn and Aquarius, there are some huge changes that happen on the material front. And this is really mostly just because the material gatekeeper, Saturn, owns Capricorn and Aquarius. And this is where I'm going to start to talk about this in my session here. The three big themes that are interacting here is that Neptune laps Pluto every 500 years, which just happened 100 years ago. Pluto comes closer to the Sun than Neptune every 250 years. And then this north and south node eclipse to Pluto in Capricorn and Aquarius. Now, I should just say before we get too far in this, for everybody watching, that I've already done a few videos on this subject with a few other astrologers. If you've already seen this, just keep in mind that, you can check out those videos. I've got a few of them, and they're usually entitled Epic Planetary Shifts in History. If you look at those, you'll see the general gist of all of that. And in this video, I don't plan on going too much into that. I'm just going to give it the general gist in this conversation. And that's really what we're doing today. We're going to connect what Pluto has been doing in the large scale, the large, bigger picture. We're going to connect it to where Pluto is now in Aquarius. And we're going to connect it to these themes of sovereignty. When Pluto comes into Aquarius, especially this time around, what I feel is going to be happening is that there is going to be a struggle for sovereignty. The sovereignty of the individual is trying to break free of the shackles of capitalist, monarchical, government, bureaucratic, democratic interest that has been happening since about the 1700s. Now, I am not a Nostradamus. I'm not an anarchist. I am not a prophet by any means. I am somebody who is just watching the wheels go round, as John Lennon said. We notice patterns in astrology, and patterns exist. Synchronicities and cosmological coincidences of pattern do exist. Now, it's very important for me to always give this caveat, where as we are astrologers observing the cosmos and observing the patterns that happen in the cosmos, I often like to say, amongst scientific people, I come off mystical. And amongst mystics, I come off as more scientific and atheistic. I think this is partly because I'm a reflector in human design. I don't know too much about human design, but I've learned that I'm a reflector, and I am always playing devil's advocate. Now, with this being said, I think it's good for us to have a scientific notion that not every pattern, sometimes a spade is just a spade. It's an old Vedic story where a master and his student are sitting beside the Ganges, and they look up, and the master's chilling, but the student looks up, and he noticed there's a crow. The crow is sitting in this palm tree, and he goes, caw, and he caws. The crow caws, and a coconut falls. The student says, okay. He looks up, and he notices the crow caws again, and another coconut falls. Now, just after seeing these two coconuts fall after the crow caws, the student looks at his master and says, Master, it seems to me that every time that crow caws, a coconut falls. The master looks at him and says, are you absolutely sure? Or is this just a pattern in your mind that is an illusion? The master is right to question this, because not every pattern that we see is bound to happen, and not every prediction that we make is bound to happen. But that doesn't mean that there aren't patterns, that there aren't synchronicities. So this is a caveat that I always like to give when I'm talking about all this stuff. No one knows exactly how it's going to play out. But I invite you to consider how I see the relationship between the crows of the planets and the coconuts of material reality unfolding. Because I think I do see a pattern. Now, my friend Teresa has been hanging out with me and mentioning that she's thankful that we are looking at what's happening. And my friend Jules is hanging out with me too. Now, this is, of course, a live stream, everybody. So if you have any questions, I'm going to try to speak to them along the way. Again, note that we aren't going to be talking about any specific signs today. I'm realizing I've really made a bit of a tease by saying Pluto in Aquarius for all 12 rising signs. But this is the introduction. This is giving the base plate for what I'm going to be doing next week at this time on Sunday, where I'm going to be going through what does Pluto in Aquarius mean for Aries? What does Pluto in Aquarius mean for Taurus? What does Pluto in Aquarius mean for all the 12 signs? That'll be next week, December 11th at the same time. So for now, let's start digging into what we can get out of this Pluto and Aquarius conversation. So thankful for everybody for watching, as I usually like to say. Now, let's start digging into a little bit. First thing I'll say, really, there's a lot of amazing things happening all at the same time, and it's around this date, 2027. A lot of people are hanging on this date. Some of it seems to be numerological. Some of it seems to be prophetic in different ways. I don't know much about all that, but I do know that there is a lot happening cosmologically, and this is what I'm going to be talking about here. I'm going to give a little gumball of what's happening at that time that's really most significant, and then I'm going to show what's leading up to it. Now, just to give this gumball really quickly here, I'm just going to sort of put this way. We can see that around 2023, Uranus is trine Pluto, and Pluto and Uranus are sextile to Neptune. This is in 2023, and this is all three outer planets are in feminine signs. Now, it's interesting to think about how exactly that works, like what exactly is happening there. All these outer planets have been in these feminine signs. It's economy, it's commerce, it's subjective, it's the internal individual. We've had a lot of, we've been going through things like this cancel culture stuff. And we've been going through things related to LGBTQ+. These are all very much internalized aspects of the human experience that resonates with the internalized nature of Earth and water, Capricorn, Taurus, and Pisces. Now, the masculine is just as important as the feminine, ladies and gentlemen, and Earth has, it hasn't had, there has been lots going on, but in the past, especially since Uranus came into Taurus, there's just been this intense focus on internalized things. And it's amazing that all three of these planets are going to be in feminine signs in 2023. And at the flick of a wrist, by September 2025, I think it's better to say January of 2026. Because that's when Neptune fully enters Aries, as all these planets are going to do a bit of retrograde dancing on the cusp. By around January 2026, all three of our outer planets are going to be entering masculine signs at the same time. And I'm going to mention this, if you have any planets at the end of Virgo right now, you are getting sucked up into this kite that's being formed by these three planets. And then it'll be the same thing for any planets at the beginning of Libra, around 2025, 2026. So there will be significations there. Ultimately, it's amazing that these three outer planets are all coming into these masculine signs at the same time. That's a huge thing that we would be talking about today. Now, eventually, we're going to be talking about the nodes as well, but I would like to also point out is that in February 2027 and February 2028, Neptune and Saturn are going to be in Aries. And so Saturn is very important in the narrative of what Pluto is doing in Aquarius. Why is that? Because Saturn is the dispositor of Aquarius. Saturn is carrying whatever is happening with Pluto in Aquarius here. Now, these years are specifically relevant because of the North nodes, and this is what we're going to be showing throughout my presentation. So the North node is going to be manifesting Pluto in Aquarius And at the same time that the North Node in February 2027, there's going to be eclipses to the North Node in Aquarius. And Saturn is going to be very vulnerable, not only just because it's in Aries, but it's going to be with nebulous, transcendent, confusing, spiritual Neptune. For better or worse. There's a very strong door open here for the pressure of Neptune to sculpt spiritual diamonds in materially, economically depraved situations. And there's going to, so far as I can see it, there will be a struggle to enact what exactly is the meaning of Pluto in Aquarius while this is happening. Now, Pluto in Aquarius is very different from Pluto in Leo. This is something I'd like to explain quickly because not just because my friend Teresa mentioned that Pluto in Leo was a generation that we all know as the baby boomers. The baby boomers were this big explosion of population that occurred after the wars that happened while Pluto was in Cancer. Pluto in Cancer was this gestation period, and then there was a whole bunch of babies born while Pluto was in the sign of Leo. Now, cosmologically, this is something I'd like everybody to think about. Okay? Just take this as whatever grain of salt you wish. Vedic astrology is very big on dispositors. The West, we call them dispositors. In Vedic, we call them house lords. I'm going to remind everybody now that I'm a tropical Vedic astrologer. I use Western measurements, but I apply Vedic interpretation to it. So, in the Vedic sense, hello AKB727. In the Vedic sense, dispositors, the house lords, the planets that channel the sign, are really the container for the narrative. This is especially important for the outer planets because the outer planets are outside of the chakra system that I've already mentioned, right? I shouldn't have exited out of it. I've already mentioned that the outer planets exist outside of the typical chakra system that we all recognize in the signs, right? The first 6 chakras are conveyed by the 6 dualities of the zodiac. Capricorn and Aquarius, first. Sagittarius and Pisces, second. Aries and Scorpio, third. Taurus and Libra, fourth. Gemini and Virgo, fifth chakra. Mercury. And then the 6th is Cancer and Leo. These are all contained within the zodiac, and the outer planets exist outside of the signs. They are their own thing. This is how the Neo-Vedic people are thinking about it. So the dispositors, which means that the planet that owns the sign that an outer planet is in, is very important. And this is what I want to convey here, okay? Think about how slow Saturn moves. Saturn is the material. It's the furthest from the sun, according to out of all 6 chakra systems, the sun is up here, the spirit. And the sun and the moon, the sun doesn't, it has a speed. It has a yearly progression around the zodiac. The moon is even faster. The moon is the fastest. So when Pluto's in Cancer, think about this, okay? The moon is channeling Cancer when Pluto is in Cancer. That means wherever the moon is and whatever it interacts with is speedily channeling Pluto's energy. It's a different thing than Saturn. What happens is we all go through this internal crazy suckhole process where we are constantly being bombarded by change and transformation. That was what was happening in the Great Depression. People were going through Pluto and Cancer, and it's as if nothing stuck. Nobody could stick to anything. Although if anybody could make something stick out of collective power, Capricorn, big crazy progressions could happen, such as Hitler. Hitler was doing his thing while Pluto was in Cancer. And everyone had nothing to grip, but big collective things would have a grip. Because everyone's moons were so mutable while Pluto was in Cancer, they wanted a leader. They wanted some kind of Capricornian dude to show them the way outside of their internally spinning. Everything is mutable and changing. Now, when Pluto was in Leo, there was a little bit more grip because the sun takes a year to go around the zodiac. So while Pluto is in Leo, Pluto is channeling its energy through the sun. And the sun goes through a sign in the zodiac once every month. So every month, while Pluto is in Leo, Pluto is affecting transformation through its dispositor, the sun, in one sign a month, right? So we experience the Plutonian transformation of the sun in whatever sign it's in for a month. Then next month, it's like, okay, don't have to deal with that anymore. Now I'm dealing with this next thing. So really cool when you think about it. Pluto and Leo typifies this sort of, that's the sun. Pluto teaches us about the nature of the timetable of every planet that it's channeling through. Now, what happens when Pluto is channeling Saturn? It's the opposite of the sun. It is the furthest planet in the manifest chakras. Remember, like I said, Capricorn and Aquarius are the root chakra. They're the furthest from the sixth chakra. So what is happening when Pluto is being channeled through the root chakra? Well, Saturn takes about 2.5 years to go through its sign. 2.5 years is a long time, as we all know from the recent pandemic that just happened. Doesn't seem like a long time in the span of a lifetime, but a day of sitting with the same people you've been with, we know what happened during the pandemic. This is still happening, I think, for some people in some places, where one day sitting in the same thing, the same people, the same pressure, having no money, whatever, when you're under dire straits, you can't go outside, you're afraid to go out and eat food, one day is a painful blister in one's experience. It can be, depending on how you lived through that whole thing. It was a tough thing for a lot of people. Now, this is Saturn energy. And I'm going to talk about how I mentioned that there was a south node eclipse on Capricorn in 2019 while Pluto was in Capricorn. And it led to that in my cosmological. Again, I'm just pointing at a crow cawing and the coconut dropping. It could be a coincidence. I have to give that caveat, but I think that did happen. So when Saturn is the dispositor for what Pluto is doing, Saturn makes such slow carving into every sign that it's in that it can be a blistering experience that ultimately creates big material changes, especially wherever Saturn is by sign. And this is why it's very significant that at the beginning of this whole thing, the nodes being the manifestation points, there's going to be north node eclipses on Aquarius while Pluto is there. The north nodes bring manifestation, and Pluto is channeling through its dispositor Saturn. And in February of 2027, Saturn is not only going to be in its debilitation in Aries, but it's also going to be completely wet and slippery from Neptune being conjunct Saturn in the sign of Aries. So this means a lot for the sign of Aries, and it means a lot for the sign of Aquarius. Really, we're going to talk about that point as we go along. But before we get into that, I'm going to give everybody a little bit of a taste. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know we're here to talk about Pluto and Aquarius. But, I think that part of the reason I wanted to have this introduction is because I feel just talking about Pluto and Aquarius is a bit too cookbooky. Astrology is so much more complex than just, what's this planet in its sign. Just like when we do any sign videos. I have a lot of Venus in the sign videos. I always say, Venus does do better in some signs than other signs. But ultimately, you got to look at everything going on with Venus in order to know. I have Venus in Virgo, and I have positive things going on with my Venus that make it so that while it's still debilitated, there are things related to Venus that can happen in a chart that bring out its positive qualities, because the sign is just one aspect of a planet. There's the aspects, there's where it is in the year, there's what the planet's relationship is to the other planets that it's racing around. So it's the same thing with Pluto. We could read just about Pluto's catalyst for transformation, Aquarius, material networks, social networks, and that's true. That will be that will be resonant in its own way. But I'm trying to look at just a little bit of a deeper picture of what Pluto does. Now, in particular, again, in this little video, I'd like to point out 3 trends that are important. One is Neptune lapping Pluto. One is Pluto coming closer to the sun than Neptune. And I'm going to talk about how this is relevant at a certain point. Now, trend 3 is this very important thing. And this is when the south or the north node eclipse happens on Pluto while it's in the sign of Capricorn or Aquarius. Capricorn and Aquarius are ruled by the gatekeeper of material world affairs, Saturn. And it can make some crazy, painful changes. Now, this is one of the reasons why I want to be doing this video today, is to talk about other times in history when Pluto has been in the sign of Aquarius, especially when the north node or the south node is touching Pluto while it's in Capricorn or Aquarius. Big things tend to happen in the material world because of all the chakras. The root chakra is the one where people can point fingers and say that is clearly a sign of some sort of unquestionable manifestation of transformation and change. The government systems go through a complete shock and awakening and a change-up. One of the reasons I like to talk about this particular video of this change is because we can point at that and say, this is no coincidence that the cock crowed and the coconut fell. There's really a pattern to be recognized here, I think. So, again, thanks everybody for watching. It's very cool to see everybody hanging out. I see Michelle can't wait for us to do the individual things. The Mind of Mary Magdalene is hanging out, and I'm glad to have you here listening as well. So, what we're going to be going through is a little glimpse at what we expect to be happening in the next little bit. So I'm going to go all the way back here. This is basically the beginning of my little presentation here. This is Pluto in the sign of Aquarius. What exactly can we expect to be happening from this period? Well, first, let's take a little glimpse of what Pluto has been doing. The first trend that I mentioned is that Neptune just recently conjuncted Pluto, and it's going to do something that happens every time Pluto comes around the signs of Leo and Virgo. We're going to explain it as we come along. Really, I should probably just do this. I'm going to do a little switcheroo here. So, in 1840, Neptune was in the 11th from Pluto. This is 1870. Neptune is coming up behind Pluto. And by 1882, Neptune was in the same sign as Pluto. It was basically caught up. Now, people born around this time include Aleister Crowley, Carl Jung, and Ramana Maharshi. These are all big people that have made huge changes in the world. And they had these 2 outer planets in the sign of Taurus. You can see that especially with Carl Jung and the Taurus erotic psyche and the unconscious. Now, in 1891, Neptune fully conjuncted Pluto, and this was in the sign of Gemini. And lots of, I'm going to say significant people emerged on the planet here at this time. This includes Hitler and Mao Zedong, who clearly made lots of significant changes for better or worse. But Paramahansa Yogananda is the reigning supreme figure of the positive side of this for me. I really am into Yogananda's whole thing. Now, my friend Teresa is saying that I should do shorter videos as well as longer videos. And I appreciate that, Teresa. I love when you, I love that idea. Because I'm trying to do short videos as well as long videos. But I like doing these long videos as well. Now, Krishnamacharya, someone who really put the seed of yoga into the West. Prabhupada, Dane Rudyard, a very important evolutionary astrologer. All these guys were born not in 1891, but around the time that Neptune was conjunct Pluto in Gemini. There's another guy named Ganesh Baba that was born around this time. He's a cool character. Now, Neptune started to get away from Pluto, and by 1915, Neptune was in the second sign from Pluto. By 1954, Neptune was exactly sextile Pluto, 60 degrees apart. It's the third sign from Pluto. Now, this is where the significant thing happened. This is what I discussed as trend number 2. Trend number 2 is when Pluto comes closer to the Sun than Neptune. Every 250 years, and it's around the time of Pluto in mid-Virgo that it starts. And this is what's going on here. What we see is that Pluto has a wonky orbit compared to all the other planets. It kind of goes like this, and that's part of the reason. That's a whole discussion that can be discussed in terms of Pluto. But another thing that happens with Pluto is that its orbit is not only wonky this way. I'm going to try to put this way. So we have Pluto here. This is Pluto. And, this is the Sun, rather. And all the planets are going around the Sun. Now, Pluto's orbit is not only like this, but it's also like this. It goes way farther outside of the band than most other planets, and then it actually comes closer to the Sun than Neptune, right? So you see what I'm saying? All the planets generally are in the middle of the Sun's orbit. Pluto is like this, which makes it whack, but it's also like this, meaning that Saturn, well, I think you guys see what I'm saying. Pluto comes closer in orbits to the Sun than Neptune does every 250 years. Now, this obviously has cosmological significance, right? What we can kind of see from it, it's around this time that, thank you, Teresa, I appreciate you. I'm glad all you guys are enjoying this. So, Neptune is sextile Pluto. It's ahead 60 degrees in 1954. It's around this time that Neptune appears, and I've said that it goes through this retrograde motion compared to Pluto. Now, it's not exactly the right language, and I've changed my understanding of it. My friend Michael Moon really gave me the beans on what's happening here. Essentially, from Earth's perspective, Pluto has come closer in orbit than, closer to the Sun in orbit than Neptune. So what appears to be happening is that Pluto appears from Earth's perspective to be going faster than Neptune. Now, of course, we know this whole time Neptune is going faster than Pluto. It catches up with Pluto, and then from here, it's still catching up with Pluto. But for about what appears to be about 60 years, Neptune stays exactly sextile Pluto. And when I saw this, when I was researching this, I was wondering, like, why the heck is it why is Neptune getting stuck in a sextile? And this is what happens. 1958, it's Virgo and Scorpio. 1972, Pluto in Libra, Neptune in Sagittarius. 1985, Pluto in Scorpio, Neptune in Capricorn. 1999, Pluto in Sagittarius, Neptune in Aquarius. You'll see that it stays in this sextile right up literally to the point that we're at today, which is of course significant. So what's happening here? What's going on is that from Earth's perspective, Neptune appears to be going slower than Pluto. The mob boss reality is going faster, appears to be going faster from Earth's perspective than spirituality, ethics, and they get locked into a tight tension of sextile tension. Right? So this, I would almost say it this way, okay? In 1954, let's say Pluto was at 10 degrees, probably more like 20 degrees of Leo, and Neptune was at, I should put it this way, I should just bring it up closer to, let's say Pluto was about 5 degrees of Leo, and Neptune was about 5 degrees of Libra. Okay? Now, let's say in 1958, my dates are a little bit askew here, but I believe it's 1958 when these two just came into Virgo and Scorpio. So let's say Pluto was at about 5 degrees of Virgo, and Neptune was at 5 degrees of Scorpio here. Now, by 1972, let's say Pluto was at about 7 degrees of Libra, and Neptune was at 0 degrees of Sagittarius. They were perfectly sextile in 1954, but by 1972, Pluto was actually ahead more in this sextile than Neptune was. Say Neptune was about 50 degrees of the sextile. Then in 1985, it was probably still around 50 degrees. It was really around 2000 and even 1999. Around this time, Neptune starts to catch up to the exact sextile of Pluto. I mean, Neptune starts going faster from Earth's perspective. Of course, what we really know is that Pluto is going away from the sun. It's going back into the far part of its long dimension of its orbit around the sun, right? Pluto is like this, you know, it's kind of like there's part of it where it comes closer to the sun than Neptune, and then it goes far out, far away. I guess I should just, I've already kind of conveyed this, but this is just to bring more to understanding here, right? This is how Pluto's orbit is. It's like this. It comes very close to the sun, closer than Neptune, and then it comes far away, basically once it's going out towards like Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, you know, Taurus, around that area. My brain doesn't have the astronomy perfect for this, but I know that around the time it gets to Leo, Virgo, it's coming in closer, and then it starts to stretch out far away. And while it's closer, it appears to be going faster than Neptune, and that's what we're talking about here. So around 2012, Neptune appears to be going faster, and it's about 2026 that Neptune becomes exactly sextile Pluto. So after this, of course, what happens is that Neptune shoots through and starts moving faster. This is happening at the same time that, of course, all those planets are coming into the masculine signs at the same time, as we've already seen here. With this situation, right? 2023, they're all in feminine signs. 2025, they're all in masculine signs. This is around this time that Neptune has been breaking free from its toehold, its stranglehold from Pluto. So Neptune is gaining its capacity, and it's gaining in strength in this sort of way, right? It's hard to convey exactly what that strength means. But we can say that it's breaking free from a certain stranglehold that Pluto has on it. Now, we should say it's relevant to say that this trend didn't it didn't happen in the same way in the 1700s. Now, I want to look at an important time in history, and I just want to squeeze through this. This is what I've been describing in my other videos. We see the same thing happened in the 1300s. This is just before the Enlightenment era, where humanity started getting out of the medieval ages. 1350, Neptune was in the 11th from Pluto. 1375, it was in the 12th. And then in 1387, it came within 10 degrees of Pluto in Taurus. Then Pluto was exactly conjunct Gemini in 1399. So this is literally about 500 years ago. 2 Pluto cycles, give or take a bit of years change, right? Does everybody see that going on? It's interesting that Neptune is actually on really the same dial. Now, Neptune does have a very different orbit. You know, if I were just to show you the 1700s, in the 1700s, this didn't play out the same way. But 500 years ago, from the beginning of, 1890, was Neptune conjunct Pluto in Gemini. That's when Hitler was born and all those other guys. 500 years before that, Neptune was conjunct Pluto in the sign of Gemini again. So this is almost like an octave of what happened, right? This is an octave of what's recently happened in the year 1900. 1400 and 1900 almost have the same Pluto and Neptune placement. So what's happening in the 1400s is basically the 1900s, right? This is just like what what I just showed. 1454 is just like 1954, right? This is what this is essentially saying. Now, 1467, it's the same formation that was in place during the 1960s psychedelic revolution. 1479, it was the same, right? Now, I want everybody to note that in 1493, Columbus entered the New World. And this is around this time when Neptune was, the same thing was happening at this time. Pluto was closer than Neptune, but from Earth's perspective, right? So then we have 1507, Pluto in Sagittarius with Neptune in Aquarius. And then we have Pluto in Capricorn with Neptune in Pisces. This is just like what's been happening since 2008, 2010. Right? We're going to talk about Martin Luther in just a moment and what he did around 1517. So this coincides with Pluto leaving its proximity to the Sun and Neptune appearing to move faster, right? This is the turn of the Enlightenment era, folks. This is when humanity completely shifted and changed. Now, 1535 this is us crawling out of the medieval era, the Dark Ages. And this is an exact octave of what's happening. 1535 is resonant with about 2026. Right? And it's relevant to note that the years are a little bit different, mind you. Like it's not exactly 500 years. So we can't expect that there's going to be something big that happens in 1535. But we can look at the cycle and see these resonances. So it's in 1540 that Neptune exactly sextiled Pluto again. And Neptune was 60 degrees from Pluto and started moving faster, right? Neptune at this point started appearing from Earth's perspective to move faster. And it was in 1543, just as Neptune, around the time Neptune starts moving faster, Copernicus released his theory that the Earth revolves around the Sun. Look at the implications of what that did on planet Earth after that fact. It's an amazing thing to think about. How can something so meaningful happen today? Anything could happen. We could discover, some kind of crazy anti-gravity through some extraterrestrial that comes down to us and says, like, hey, here's some crazy new technology. Like this is the kind of thing that happened. That kind of paradigm shift happened last time 500 years ago when Pluto was in Aquarius and Neptune was in Aries. And Neptune was just breaking out of its tight stranglehold from the sextile of Pluto. Okay, so we see that 1540 kind of resonates with 2026. 1443 is when Copernicus released his theory. Now, this is all fun stuff. I don't want to get too much into all this because I've done it in other videos, but it's relevant to say this point, trend number 3, which is that the south and north node eclipses upon Pluto in Capricorn or Aquarius are very important because these are signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, that are ruled by the gatekeeper of material world affairs, which is Saturn. So we see that any time that there is a north or south node eclipse on Pluto in Capricorn or Aquarius, there are big world changes. Now let's just take a quick little peek at a few examples here. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is relevant. So it was around 1517 that this Protestant Reformation started happening. And, you know, I should say at this point, this is really what we're getting at with all this, is playing at what I said at the start of this video. Pre-1400s, God and the Church and the Vatican ruled things. Now, what I'm talking about here is how Martin Luther developed into this system of monarchy. The king had power over the decisions of the people, not God, not just the church, because the church was getting excessive at this time, right? The church was doing things. They were, able to, a priest could go and, not terribly unlike today, a priest could go in, the 1500s and ransack, just do the pedophilic thing that priest-like people who don't engage with their lower chakras and they don't embrace the sexual and genetic energy that's coming from inside their own energy field. They try to sublimate it, they try to repress it, and what they do is they go and they do the pedophilic thing because then that way they're not really being with a woman. And they got to buy their forgiveness at this time. In the 1500s, people in the church could do wild-ass shit like that and buy it off. And they could just say, because they were the ones with money, most of the people had no money, the rich were the people in the church, and they would say, you know what, I kind of did some bad things, I kind of went and raped a few people, but it's okay, guys, because I'm going to take a third of my earnings from all of you and give it to the poor. So, look at how much good that I'm doing, despite these few rapes that I'm doing. This is how people in the church thought at this time. And, Martin Luther came along and said that basically only God could judge a man, and a wealthy stateholder could not simply buy God's forgiveness. I'm a spiritual person. I'm interested in religion, but for everybody watching, if you're an atheistic-minded person, we're talking about how this stuff shaped political policy and, rational human policy at this time. So I'm not going to stick to the God things, but Martin Luther was essentially a sort of a synthetic-minded person, a Ganeshian person, who was combining religiosity with the affairs of the common man and trying to remove the gross hold of the state and power that was allowing the religious people to do their things in the name of religion at the expense of everybody. Martin Luther was this syncretic type of mind. Now, it's amazing at this time. Let's look at what is happening in this chart. 1517, he came along and released his 95 Theses. And these theses was him challenging and inviting to debate Catholic dogma that was ruling at the time. As the Vatican and the churches ruled over all the nations at this time, really. The kings of everything. This is this is pre-Shakespeare time. Everybody knows the crazy things. If you know English and the history of what was going on at that time, there were crazy surges for power. That's what Hamlet was all about, because Hamlet occurred in this era when the church was no longer holding all the power. And Martin Luther's the reason why the church wasn't holding all the power. He released this information at this time that went out to everybody, and everyone got super shook by it. Now let's look at 1517. This is the year that he put this out here. And it just so happens that there was an eclipse in Cancer on the North Node while Pluto was in Capricorn. So we see Pluto is a part of the axis, and Pluto was on the South Node. So there was like a slingshot factor happening here. Now, when you look about 8.5 to 10 years later, we see now the North Node. This is 1527. The North Node came around as it goes backwards. And once it came into the vicinity of Capricorn, there was lots of things changing at this time. And while this North Node eclipse was occurring in Capricorn, the Holy Roman Empire attacked Rome. And Rome, the Pope was imprisoned. And this is considered to be the end of the Italian Renaissance era. It's part of the growing Protestant movement, which was undercutting the autocratic rule of the Catholic Church ever since Martin Luther started revolts in Germany and all around. This sacking of Rome was a continuation of what was started in 1517. Now, Pluto was still in Capricorn at this point. And the nodes are a manifesting point. And this is what I kind of want to say here. This is why we're talking about this, is because the nodes act as this manifestor point. Whenever the nodes have an eclipse in a sign, as we all know, whatever planets are transiting in there, whatever's happening in that sign is being brought to the surface through the power of the nodes. Now, when Pluto is doing its work in a Saturn-ruled sign, Capricorn or Aquarius, there's lots of stuff happening underneath the surface that we don't see. The nodes are what bring it out. The nodes are what bring it to the surface. And this isn't just talking about what's happening with Pluto and Aquarius. This is also talking about what's happening with Neptune getting out of its stranglehold from Pluto. That's a part of this undercurrent that the nodes are going to bring into manifestation, because the nodes bring it all to the front. Everything that's been happening, all the feelings, because everyone is feeling these feelings. And certain people are holding that Neptune energy more than others. Certain people are holding the Pluto and the Saturn energy more than others. So people like Martin Luther, if they have enough keys in their psyche that have enough outer planets in certain places, in angles or whatever, are going to cause them to listen to their own intuition, to act on the key code given by the planets at that time to unfold whatever karma, whatever destiny they have in order that's making them need to change the planet. We all have, not all of us, I should say, but many people have similar things inside them that can get triggered by moments like this. So now let's fast forward. 1934. In 1934, Pluto has now just entered Aquarius. And of course, Neptune is just about to enter Aries. Still just a little bit behind, and it's in the sign of Pisces. So Neptune wasn't fully caught up with the sextile. Neptune was still behind for a while, but now it's direct compared to Pluto now. Now Neptune appears to be going faster than Pluto because Pluto has left the sun's orbit. So it's 15, this says 1934, but it's supposed to say 1534. I keep forgetting to change that. Now by this time, this is 9 years after the sacking of Rome, around there. Not 9, but, whatever it is. It's 27, 56, 7 years. Yeah, basically 7 years. Now, what's happening now is that the North Node is in Leo, which means, of course, that the South Node is in Aquarius. What's happening is that there's an eclipse on the Sun and Moon at 4 degrees of Aquarius. Pluto is at 2 degrees of Aquarius. And the north node is at 16 degrees Leo, which means the south node, K2, which is just as important. You never see it in the Western charts, which I think is silly. But the Vedic people consider that whatever goes on the north node has the south node for a base. And they're the two sides of the same coin. So this was a south node eclipse on Pluto in Aquarius in 1534. Now, what exactly happened? Wow, around this time, one of the most historically, I say this in a tongue-in-cheek way because King Henry VIII, I'm Henry VIII, I am, if you've ever heard that, he made huge changes. And it's almost that song is a joke on a narcissism that people often think he displayed, as we're going to see. But some people respect him because he's one of the people that we have to at least respect, that he pulled the power out of the excessive, gross autocracy that was the Vatican Church at the time. And this is why did he do that? This is what we're talking about here. In the midst of the Protestant reformations which occurred, that were initiated by Martin Luther, around this time, it's 1534, Pluto's making its changes. It's in Aquarius now. It just entered Aquarius. Now, King Henry VIII wanted to annul his marriage to his first wife because she would not give him a male heir. Of course, this is kind of a gross statement of his character, too. He basically threw his wife out like a used napkin because it's her fault that you won't give me a male heir. It must be the woman's fault, right? Patriarchy. So, at this time, King Henry VIII, I'm Henry VIII, I am, and I want a new wife. But the church refused to validate the new marriage with his new wife. Now, not that that's a great thing on the church's part either, you know, but it's an interesting thing happening with the power struggle going on here. The church, who's the autocrat above the king, said, we refuse to validate this new marriage for you. We don't recognize your second marriage under the church. So King Henry said, okay, well now here's what's happening. You guys are no longer in power, Mom and Dad. Remember that key tone. You guys are no longer in power, Mom and Dad. We're going to see that tone coming through every time Pluto reaches Aquarius, just like in today's time. So King Henry VIII looks at Mom and Dad, the autocratic Vatican, and says, screw you guys. Screw you, Pope. I am now the heir to the power of God as the King of England. So he ushered in a new form of power called the divine right of kings, which overthrew the power of the Catholic papacy, giving rise to English Protestantism. There's the guy. So the Act of Supremacy in 1534, this is this year, this declared that the king was the only supreme head on earth of the Church of England. This is, of course, the South Node blistering into the influence that the eclipse in Aquarius had. Now, this didn't happen in January of 1534. But as everybody knows, when an eclipse happens, it's not just the exact moment of the eclipse that's powerful. It's the things that happen around the eclipse show reverberations of that. You know, astrology is just the crow cawing. The coconut falling is the actual things that happen from that moment. So, the Treasons Act of 1534 made it high treason, punishable by death, to refuse the oath of supremacy, acknowledging the king as such. This has a lot of gross things that happened in history because of this moment. You know, this is ultimately a terrible thing. Not because it got its hands out of the church, but once the hands were out of the church, once the power was out of the hands of the church, now the power is on the kingship, and that is, like, you know, not grosser, but can definitely be conveyed as having some gross elements because, you know, like I'm Akkadian. the Acadian people were the neutral French who refused to bow to the King of England in the 1700s, around the time of the next Pluto in Capricorn. And they all just kind of got dispersed and killed and all this stuff because the king was looking for the whole world to bow to England. And this was started at this time, which is a bad thing, but at least, again, it got out of the hands of the church. So we see the themes of Neptunian truth and individual sovereignty mixing with Pluto's fixation of power. Now, we could say that kingship and government monarchy simply replaced the church, but this important step did lead to our contemporary forms of government. It's not a great thing because it was just replacing one lordship with another, but it's leading towards, as I keep showing, is individual sovereignty. I wish I had that slide here. So, the eclipses occurring while Pluto is in Saturn-ruled Capricorn and Aquarius seems to prompt the biggest turns in the power structures of history. Now let's fast forward to 1543, right? And does this ring a bell? We've already talked about this date. Now, this was the first Aquarius North Node eclipse on Pluto that happened at this time, right? We know that when Pluto entered Aquarius, the first nodal eclipse was this one in 1534, and it was a south node eclipse. That's something that's different from this time compared to from 1534 as compared to today. There was a south node eclipse first. In our time, as we're going to see, it's going to be a north node eclipse that hits Aquarius first. Now, after, King Henry did his thing, about 9 years later, the North Node came back to Aquarius. So we see that there is a North Node eclipse in Aquarius. And, of course, the proximity of Pluto to the sun and moon, or anything to the sun and moon, is generally the most important thing. When the North Node is this close to the sun and moon, you can usually say that there's going to be some significant change. 1543 is, of course, the year that Nicholas Copernicus released his theory of heliocentrism, the idea that Earth revolves around the sun. This caused repercussions to religion that were unheard of until this point. And as well, the power structures of the church. This was really kind of the final blow. And of course, this is what got us, in some ways, out of the medieval ages and into the more industrial age, the 1600s, the 1700s, the slave ships, the settlements that happened on the New World of America. This is all happening around this time. It's crazy that it lines up with all this stuff. Now, I always give this bit short thrift. This is the 1770s. This is the Great American Revolution. Now, Pluto had come close to the sun around this time, and there were south and north node eclipses. This is a date showing the signing of the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, it's 1776. Now, this was the actual date, and unfortunately, I didn't show a picture, but I should have shown that 2 weeks later, there was a partial solar eclipse in Cancer opposite Pluto. Now, the North Node was still in Leo, so that's probably why I didn't show it. This was still technically happening while there was a eclipse happening with Pluto in Capricorn, and the eclipse resonated with the same dispositor, which is Saturn. So the Declaration of Independence was happening, and really while Pluto was in the end of Capricorn, this is when we know that the Great American Revolution started. We all know this because America has Pluto in Capricorn in its natal chart, right? So in January of 1777, there was an eclipse, and this was around the time of the Declaration of Independence. It's interesting to note that Jupiter was exalted at this time, so we could say that there might be positive things that happened around this time. of course, America was a very good thing. Because America had to have a new form of freedom and of governance that was outside of that industrial age crony clause of Britain at the time. So the South Node here, this is 1777. This is around the time that the Great American Revolution started. It was a huge, long war that happened at this time. It was about 6 years long, 6 or 7 years long. Now we see that the sun and the moon have come conjunct an eclipse in Capricorn, and the North Node is in Cancer, which means that the South Node is at 27 degrees of Capricorn, right on Pluto. And this would have been close enough to the sun, definitely within 10 degrees. Of course, the sun was probably closer to 20 degrees of Capricorn. So they were all within the last decade of Capricorn. Mercury was there too, which is interesting. But the point is that the South Node eclipse happened while Pluto was there in Capricorn. This resonates with our recent pandemic eclipse, by the way. Right? This is a time when the Great American Revolution started. Lots of things were happening at this time, including, yes, this was pretty much around the time of the diaspora of the Akkadian people. That really technically started around 1750s, but by this time it was really in full swing, and the Akkadian people were just looking for places to go. Lots was happening on the world stage in the fight for territory between France and England. And America was just like, while England was doing its thing, America was like pulling itself out of the womb of Britain. And again, this chart here, this is December 25th, 2019. This is from the recent pandemic eclipse. Of course, the sun and moon are in Capricorn, and Pluto is also in Capricorn. And the South Node was in Capricorn too, all in the same sign and all in the having Saturn for a dispositor. Now, this was, again, the American Great Revolutionary War. It ended in 1783, and this is when Pluto had the North Node on it in Aquarius. So there's lots to kind of be said here, but I don't want to go too much into all this. Now, this brings us back into today's time. We see this was this is 2012, and then 2012, and then 2026. We know that Neptune is just like in Copernicus's time. Neptune is just getting out of its intense sextile with Pluto while it's in Aries. Now, let's take a look at Uranus and see how Uranus is dealing with this. Uranus was conjunct Pluto in 1851. Then it was trine Pluto in 1885, opposite Pluto in 1903. This was an interesting opposition that happened here between Uranus and then Pluto and Neptune in Gemini. Then Uranus was trine, it's the latter balsamic trine to Pluto, 1922. Uranus conjuncted Pluto in Virgo in 1965. And then Uranus conjuncted Neptune in 1993. This is my generation. So Uranus is its own funky little, arbiter of instigation and change, as we all know. Now, this has led us coming up to what is happening in today's time, folks. Uranus is trine Pluto, sextile Neptune, and this is all in the feminine signs. And we can see by 2025, maybe it's better to say January of 2026, Uranus and Neptune and Pluto will have this kite formation all in masculine signs. Masculine energy of air signs and Neptune in a fire sign all resonates more with action, with ego, with active manifestation of things. And that's sort of a for better or worse situation with all things considered. I will say that I do think this is going to get worse before it's going to get better, but I do think it's going to get better. But there's a particular time we have to look at, and it's 2026, 2027, 2028. It has to do with the eclipses. Now, something I didn't show here, and I wanted to, but I'm just going to mention it quickly here. Before I even got into astrology, I was really into social change. And I still am, but there was a time around 2009, 2010. I wish I'd made a chart for it. There was a Capricorn South Node eclipse around 2010, 9 years before 2019, right? So around 2010, Pluto got to Capricorn in 2008. And there were North Node eclipses in Capricorn around 2009, 2010. Does anybody remember when everyone was against like the banks and the stock market? I'm trying to think of the actual movement, but it was a big movement in Toronto. It was essentially, I should be able to think of this name, Occupy. It was the Occupy movement, Occupy Wall Street. That's what I was trying to say. Does everybody remember Occupy Wall Street? That was happening while there was a North Node eclipse in Capricorn, and Pluto was in Capricorn. Occupy Wall Street was a picture in time of the manifestation of the underbelly of the weird, gross deposits of capitalist power that have happened through the governing agencies of the present time. Pluto has been waiting to come back to Capricorn again to shine a light through the slow, painful, meticulous way that it does, especially when it's in a Saturn-ruled sign. That time was a perfect depiction of the gross kind of, well, just the energy that we're dealing with here, because Occupy happened. A whole bunch of people, I was there for Occupy Toronto. It was very weird because we were all feeling the energy of this transformation. It was the time we were talking about Illuminati. It was just before the Mayan calendar was going to change. The elites and the lizards are all ruling the world, and this is our time to take action against all this vague elitism that nobody could really put their finger on exactly. And this was the Occupy movement, and it came through, and I remember us all talking about it. Like, we have this feeling that there's something going on, but there's no one to point a finger exactly at. This is because in today's, there was tent cities in Toronto. Michael Gregory, AKB, remembers it as well. So, at this time, these sorts of things were happening. And the weird, crazy sort of thing was that nobody knew where to go with it. So the energy came through, and it was sort of this, like, idea that humanity could come up, but the Occupy movements kept trying to go. But what ended up happening is that the cops ended up kicking them out. The cops did the same thing recently with the COVID pandemic, where there was tent cities being built up, and the cops would just slowly come in and meticulously wipe it all under the bridge. Just tuck it all under the carpet, pretend like all these people who are going through these terrible, difficult experiences don't exist, because regular, quote-unquote, normal people need to go and get their coffee without seeing the big eyesore of the tent city. So the cops just sort of move along, you're blocking the sidewalk, get back to wherever it is you came from. And that's what happened in the pandemic times. And this also happened around 2010, 2011 with Occupy Wall Street and Occupy Toronto. So that's its own crazy debate, what exactly was going on there. Again, as cosmological interpreters of patterns, we are really just pointing at the craziness of Pluto going through Capricorn. Everybody's sensing this thing going on. So that was something that I wanted to put at this period in my presentation. So there was a North Node eclipse on Pluto in Capricorn in 2010. Now, 9 years later, we're looking at the North Node solar eclipse in Cancer in July of 2019. And this was the South Node solar eclipse was in Capricorn, December of 2019. This is when the pandemic started. It just also happened to be when Jupiter and Saturn came conjunct. This says Capricorn, but it was actually Aquarius. They came conjunct at the first degree around there of Aquarius, which some people say is its own signifier of the age of Aquarius. That's what my friend Michael Moon has suggested. Although ultimately, me and him, it's hard to say what exactly, we all know that the age of Aquarius is the ecliptic shifting from Pisces. It's that 26,000 year cycle, and every 2,000 years, the ecliptic shifts, and it's shifting into Aquarius. But the Vedic people have a different idea of that. Everybody's got a different idea of that. That's why I don't talk about it. But these Aquarian themes are all interesting. How we can interpret cosmologically is at some level, we can do it infinitely. But we can see Aquarian themes coming through today, especially in what I'm talking about with regards to the sovereignty issue, the sovereignty of the individual. Now, there was a North Node solar eclipse in Cancer in July of 2020. So this was this sort of pandemic that recently happened that we all know about. And this was kicked off around this time when the nodes were on Pluto in Capricorn. So that one was the one that the whole world felt. Now, the nodes were on the Gemini and Sagittarius axis in 2021. And as we all know, this year, the North Node was with Uranus in Taurus. And of course, whenever the nodes and whenever there's eclipses to something like Uranus, big things do happen. We know that cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, we know that the North Node with Uranus and Taurus, it's bringing out what Uranus is doing in Taurus. And it's significant. I mean, this isn't as significant as what I'm thinking is the Pluto things. But, at this time, it's in the earthy trine from Pluto in Capricorn. What's happening here is there is an interesting struggle going on. So, I'm seeing some interesting comments here. It's an interesting, Laurel is saying that the Vietnam student protesters were massacred by the state, and this was a critical precursor to Occupy, for sure. So that the Occupy movement is something that's the pin of a much deeper under-ebbing thing that's been going on. Basically, what we're dealing with is the end of our current Pluto in root chakra visitation cycle. The last time that Pluto came through our root chakra, remember, I'm always going to keep bringing up, this particular picture here, right? We see that Aquarius and Capricorn are the root chakra. Let me see. Hopefully you guys can see this. Capricorn and Aquarius are the root chakra. Jupiter is Sagittarius and Pisces at the second chakra. Mars rules Scorpio and Aries at the solar plexus chakra. So 250 years ago was the Great American Revolution. What we're seeing now, even with what my friend Laurel has said, where, in the 1970s, there was Vietnam War protests and there was all these things, where all these people were fighting against the autocracy of our particular form of government. This was happening at the time because this was Pluto moving towards the root chakra again. Because when we look at the chakras going up and down, if we're coming from Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn at the root, that's Leo to Capricorn is a certain type of manifestation. Now Pluto's coming from Aquarius up to Cancer again. Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and Leo. It's coming back up again, and everything that's been happening is a new transformation of our root chakra. That's what happens when Pluto is moving towards Capricorn, gets past Capricorn, and enters up into Aquarius, right? I just wanted to speak to that in terms of what my friend Laurel has said on here, and I hope that gives some consciousness there. So, just to get back to where we were here, we see that the nodes again are manifestation points. The North Node on Uranus and Taurus has brought these thoughts of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and this sort of like new world government that is operated by a global unity, which we talked about for a long time in the Occupy days as a possibility of being like a bad thing. You know, Alex Jones was really big before he did his recent stuff that he's got going on. But he was big in the Occupy movement, and he talked about the idea of a new world order that could be considered a bad thing. I don't know where exactly that's at. That's not really why I'm here. But it's interesting to think of Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency stuff as being this global monetary financial thing that's being led by the individual sovereign, as opposed to it could be a global thing. So that's why I don't want to speak too much about it. But it's really coming through. We're going to speak a little bit more to the cryptocurrency thing. But for now, it's relevant to say that it came through as an idea and really kind of got popular, while the North Node was a manifestation point of Uranus in the banker's sign of Taurus. Now, 2023, we see that the North Node is in Aries. This is going to be next year. Pluto is on the cusp of Aquarius now, and it's really just starting to enter Aquarius. Same thing in 2024. There is another solar eclipse in Aries in April of 2024. And the North Node by this point is getting to the end of Aries. Then we have North Node on Neptune in Pisces in 2025. We're going to show how Saturn is a part of all this in just a moment. But 2025, the North Node is on Neptune and Pisces. 2026, the North Node's still on with Neptune and Pisces, although this is actually a mistake, really. By this point, Neptune and Saturn are really both in Aries. Like, Neptune is right on the cusp of Pisces and Aries at this point. And then by 2027, Neptune has entered Aries, right? So we know in 2026, the point here is that the North Node is in Pisces, and in 2027, the North Node meets Pluto in Aquarius. This is just like the time when King Henry VIII decided to completely change, because of a narcissistic need for power in his own right. He ended up developing into the sovereignty went from the church to individual monarchy, right? This is the same thing that happened at this time. This is when the signing of the Treaty of Paris was made, so that America had officially come through the womb of Britain. This also happened when there was a North Node eclipse on Pluto in Aquarius. So this is 2027. It's a big, important year. Now, this is all important stuff. And what's more is that in February of 2028, the North Node will still be in Aquarius. Saturn will still be with Neptune in Aries. Now, this is all very interesting to talk about. And I see why that was like that, because I was intending to go through this way. So this is this present time. Now, all of this is very interesting because now we can see that was the story of the nodes. Okay, the nodes are leading up to this 2027, 2028 point. Now, what is the final figure that I've been mentioning? What I've been moving towards is, how does Saturn and its movement resonate and reflect on what is happening in this period? Because Saturn is going to be the dispositor for Pluto. This is an important part of this story that's going to be happening around this time. okay? We know that right now, in April, this is just me showing the north, there was a north node eclipse in April of 2022 with Uranus on Taurus, and Saturn was in Aquarius, in its own sign where it's happy. By April of 2023, the north node is in Aries, and Saturn enters Pisces. Now, the Vedic people consider that, again, the dispositors are very important. Even though Neptune is going to be at the end of Pisces, Saturn is going to be at the beginning of Pisces at this time. But Saturn and Pisces are both working through the same dispositor. In this case, I would anciently say that this is Jupiter. Neptune, the Western sense of Neptune has it as a secondary ruler in Pisces, right? So I would say Jupiter is the more primary ruler of Pisces because, again, it actually has a place in the, I'm just going to keep bringing this up because I think it's relevant. Jupiter rules the second chakra of Sagittarius and Pisces, and then Mars rules the third chakra of Scorpio and Aries. Then Venus rules the fourth chakra, Libra and Taurus. So Jupiter has the primary rulership as an actual part of our energy body. Pisces is not this mystical thing that only relates with Neptune. It's not something that's outside the zodiac. It's firmly in between the first and third chakra. It's a part of that belly area, Pisces. It's not this mystical nothingness. It has energy body to it. It's now Neptune is one of the three that goes outside of the chakra system. That's why I don't necessarily correlate Neptune to Pisces in the way that most Westerners tend to do. So Jupiter is going to be relevant to this period. Really, I should have put Jupiter in here, but I thought it was enough to just focus. Maybe I'll do that when we get there into 2023. We'll talk about Jupiter because Jupiter will be channeling Saturn and Neptune at this time. What's more important is that Saturn is channeling Aquarius and Pluto and all things in your chart that fall into Aquarius. Any cusps or any natal planets that are in Aquarius are being affected by Pluto and being channeled through Saturn. And in 2023, this is going to be the beginning of some strange material world pressure mixed with confusion that's going to be happening at this time. The pressure is coming from Pluto channeling itself through Saturn. Now, Saturn is going to be in Pisces, which I would say is neutral. Jupiter and Saturn don't hate each other, but they're not friends either. I could kind of convey this through another little slide that I have. Again, I don't want to make, I am kind of bouncing here a little bit, but I think this is just sort of relevant to note here that when you consider the relationships between planets, what we see is that there is, this is how the Vedic people think of things. And you're going to see why I always bring this up in so many of my things, right? We see there's an inner spirit or inner soul, and this is the Sun, Moon, Mars, and Jupiter. They rule fire and water signs, don't they? And then we have the material embodied aspect of soul. It rules the air and earth signs, right? Venus rules Libra and Taurus, air and earth. Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo, air and earth. Saturn anciently rules Aquarius and Capricorn, air and earth. So these three all rule the earth and air signs. These four all rule the fire and water signs. So do you guys see that? This is something I'm always showing on my astrology channel because I can't bring it up enough. It's an important thing to understand. And generally the friendships of the planets, these generally are all friendly with each other. The main exceptions are Mercury and the Moon, who are a little bit weird and different. But sometimes there are neutrals, too. In this case, what we always say is that the Moon has no enemies, and nobody is an enemy of Jupiter. That's the nature of Jupiter. Jupiter is the great benefic. Nobody hates Jupiter. It's because it's the self. It's the most spiritual essence of the self beyond everything. The nature of the spirit can't be in a state of hatred. Like even Saturn, which is the material world, there is Jupiter, there is spirit inside the material. There is spirit inside of our emotions. There is spirit inside of our will. There is spirit inside of our heart. So nobody hates Jupiter. Now, that means that when Saturn is in the sign of Pisces, it's not Saturn's favorite place to be, but it's in the sign of a neutral. Now, where this kind of is at is that Saturn being in the neutral sign of Pisces is neither good nor bad. There's an energy there of confusion, though. I mean, I think anybody could call that. But it's a watery confusion. And more to the point, it's that Neptune is expanding what's happening here. But Neptune is expanding what is essentially a neutral confrontation of Saturn in its sign. So Saturn in 2023, while it's moving through Pisces, there's going to be confusion that is starting. Now, what I would like to say is that if there are any elites, if there are people in power who are aware of what's going on, they are probably going to be into astrology. They're probably watching either videos like mine or whatever, and they know what this is leading to, which is essentially Saturn coming into Aries in 2026. So the paint is going to be very wet at this time in history. And it's there's going to be pressure, but it's not going to necessarily unfold in any way. Now, what we have to understand is each planet has cycles. Saturn's interesting because it gains a lot of strength. You have to think of it this way. Saturn has its almost like a life cycle, and it's this Saturn. Oh, this is my cat, everybody. Say hi, buddy. Get a good look because you're kicked out, sir. I love my cats, but they're always interrupting these videos. Saturn has a cycle. Saturn, when it's moving towards debilitation, it's a weak part of its cycle. When it's moving towards exaltation in Libra, that's a strong side of its cycle. Okay? Now, it's interesting to think about the fact that Saturn in this cycle, let's say it starts in Aries because that's at its weakest. It has a peak when it gets to Libra. And then once it goes past Libra, it's at the last part of its cycle. And now, of course, we know Saturn is this symbol of things getting better with age. It kind of makes sense when you think about it that Saturn, after its peak in Libra, it gets another strength phase when it goes from Capricorn to Aquarius. Saturn does well in Capricorn and Aquarius, its own signs. Then once it hits Pisces, it's technically neutral. But even though it's neutral by sign, it is at the end of its leg. It's not in its own sign anymore, and it is right next door to Aries. So there will be feelings like there is some kind of impending doom, some kind of impending crash situation. With this is going to be an important time because this is a time for everybody to kind of prepare to get communal things going together, to develop on some humanity for sure. Because the material pressure of Pluto and Aquarius is going to be blending with the humanitarian aspects of Neptune. And it's going to be in a sign of neutrality where people still have a bit of money, can still kind of get things together. Now, 2025 in February, there's another North Node eclipse. This is going to be a very poignant one. This is going to be a time when Saturn and Neptune are with the North Node in Pisces. Now, I'm just gonna let this sit for one moment here, folks, because I think my girlfriend wants me to text her and let her know that I'm coming. I'm just letting her know that I'm super in this thing right now. and I'm just letting her know that I'm going to call her later. Okay. Thanks for your patience, folks. Gotta be, you gotta take care of the people who are taking care of you. Very important in terms of what we're talking about at this time. Happy wife, happy life. That's it, Teresa. Thank you very much. So, Saturn is channeling Pluto, and in 2025, it's going to be with Neptune in Pisces, and it is going to be brought out into manifestation through the North Node. This, in 2025, is going to be a very intriguing time. Now, what's going to be kind of happening at this moment is that whatever agenda Pluto has in Aquarius in your chart, whatever house it's in, whatever planets it's touching, whatever cusps it's touching, it's going to be brought out into the manifestation of a very open-ended spiritual humanitarian vibe, where you probably are going to feel like there is excess time and energy, and you're probably going to spend it in ways that are possibly, the second chakra. They say the second chakra can feel like regarded as guilt, usually because the second chakra, it's kind of related to sexuality. It's related to the joy and passion that you experience. So at this time, there's going to be a lot of people who are probably getting into things like virtual reality and, and having as much fun as possible. And it's going to feel like the world is on shaky ground, and we almost want to get the best experiences of enjoyment that we can before anything crazy happens. And there's going to be things building up that don't feel like a huge deal at the time. But it's possible that this will lead to bigger things in March of 2026 and February of 2027, right? So in February 2025, since this is all, there's a manifestation of what Aquarius represents in Pisces, and this is our second chakra. So there's going to be a deep desire to try and make things feel good in a primal way through the second chakra. And I recommend to everybody at this time to try to pay attention to your sexual urges, try to pay attention to your desire for food and for going on vacation and letting things go out of your mind. Because this will be a period where you're setting up the mental program that you are going to be chasing when Neptune is with Saturn in Aries and we have less time and energy. We will all be wanting to chase the dream of whatever enjoyment we experienced in February of 2025. So don't neglect anything. This is the second chakra. It's easy for us to all say, oh, bad Saturn things are happening. Let's just not enjoy our sexual chakras at all. Do your best to really think about Tantra and to think about the energy that you share, not only with your partner, but with your loved ones and community and family around you. This is a good thing to spend that in a positive way, because these are the themes that Pluto and Aquarius are bringing out. It's essentially root chakra manifestations of humanitarian, spiritual humanity coming together type of nature. So be careful at this time, but also joyous and discerning about how you spend and use your second chakra energy. Don't be frivolous about it, but don't be completely locked out of it either. Use it in a divine way. I suggest Tantra, that sort of thing will be important around this time. Now, in March of 2026, there's going to be more eclipses in Pisces. But by March 2026, Saturn and Neptune have entered Aries together by this time. Saturn got there around January 2026. Neptune is there now with it in Aries. There's going to be eclipses in Pisces, and then just a month after that or whatever, the sun is going to, probably 2 weeks more likely, the sun is going to enter Aries where it's exalted, and this will be a very painful time for Saturn, especially because Saturn is with Neptune. Now, this is not going to be as bad as the next year because the North Node is on Pisces at this moment. So wherever Jupiter is going to be at this time is an interesting thing. Now let's say Jupiter is going to be in Aries 2023, then Taurus 2024, Gemini 2025. So Jupiter, thankfully, one thing we can positively say around 2026, Jupiter is likely to be around its exaltation point in Cancer. And this is going to be one of the great things that's going to be helping us at this time. I'm realizing now that I should have put this in this presentation. Oh well. But it's something good to think about. Now, March 2026, the North Node is going to have its manifestation point in Pisces still, which means Jupiter coming to be around its exaltation point. This is going to be a real saving grace in this period. Now, Jupiter will also be kind of helping in 2027 because it's going to be coming into Leo, helping the South Node and North Node axis. But what we really need to focus on at this point, while Jupiter will be helping, there will still be Jupiter, in fact, if it is in Leo, it's going to be trining Saturn and Neptune. So Jupiter is going to be the saving grace at this period. Ultimately, there are a lot of intense things to look at when we consider in February of 2027. Remember that this is built up from so many things. We know that all 3 outer planets have just entered masculine signs. We know that Neptune is just breaking free from Pluto's proximity to the sun in orbit. Really, Pluto is getting out of Neptune's orbit. So now Neptune appears to be going faster from Earth's perspective. It's breaking out of the sextile from Pluto, and eventually it's going to be going to the 4th house from Pluto and the 5th house, and etc. So Neptune is gaining its natural speed back. There's going to be that shift, and essentially Saturn as the dispositor, while the North Node is manifesting Pluto in Aquarius, Saturn is the dispositor of Aquarius. It's in Aries, it's debilitated, and it's with Neptune. Now, there's a lot of difficulty that's being expressed in this period. It's going to continue even into February of 2028. The North Node will still be in Aquarius, and Saturn will still be in Aries, although it will be very much progressed by that time. So this is an important period. Something that I've wanted to kind of convey in regards to this. When this happens, I want everybody to kind of think of, remember when I was saying that every time that Pluto is in Aquarius, Pluto in Capricorn is this gestation period where the kid starts to feel internally cramped and that like their parents aren't serving them, like the government body of Capricorn interacting with Cancer is not serving them. So when Aquarius happens, Pluto in Aquarius is interacting with its opposite Leo. The self. I can go and live out on my own. So screw you, the Vatican, said King Henry VIII last time, 2 cycles ago when Pluto was in Aquarius in 1534. Screw you, Vatican. Screw you, Mom and Dad. The kingship of the monarchy of England is now the sovereign. 250 years later, America saying to Britain, screw you, Britain. The government democracy of America is now the sovereign power of America, and we don't need you anymore. 250 years later, what does it mean now Most people, I think, that probably thought that democracy would end up being the final word of shifts in sovereign power. What does it mean that in today's time, we are going to be experiencing this sort of new type of sovereign power? Well, let's just take a little peek at this picture that we've been talking about. It's the dissemination of systemic sovereignty and power. We went from the church pre-1400s. The church was the top dog. Then in the 1500s, King Henry VIII came along and said that monarchy and the divine right of kings is the new form of power. Now in the mid-1700s, right, this was the American Revolution. This is because we all know that America has Pluto in Capricorn. This is the birth of democracy, bureaucracy, plutocracy, the sort of modern ways that government has been going in America. And America set the standard for a long time. America was the biggest governing power in the world, and everyone took from America what they thought the world is supposed to be, especially throughout the 1900s. Not that I'm a sympathizer for America being... I have to say, this is coming from me, a North American. I'm in Canada, so, a lot of my history is, it serves America in this way, as showing America as this big world power and these sorts of things. But I have to speak to my bias here, because there's been so much going on in other parts of the world that are completely different from what I'm conveying here. I would love to know if people in the Spanish-speaking world, people in the French-speaking world, have a similar perspective of what I'm talking about here. Very open to that idea. But, needless to say, the American model was very much this highbrow, big picture of how the world is going. In fact, the American dollar bill, after the war, served to be the world currency for like a couple of years. Until about the 80s or the 90s, there were some crashes that happened. And the American dollar bill was no longer the power player that it was. Now, there's the coming times. I'm hoping that you guys can see this, yes. The coming times of what is a Pluto and Aquarius bringing in terms of sovereignty. What's it going to mean? I'm thinking, the internet, New World Order, Bitcoin, types of themes as related to today's time. Now, again, I don't know exactly where Bitcoin's at, and I don't know what this New World Order really means, But something that I've been thinking about, I have to use my language properly here, because I did this same whole shtick on Stormy Grace's channel. And I tried to use a word here, and I'm going to try and say it in the right way. To me, there's something happening that I would typify through the imagery of light pollution. And I don't mean this to be a bad thing. What I'm suggesting is that celebrity worship is sort of losing its prestige. Celebrity worship is becoming something that every individual has the power to have. And, everyone can kind of be their own celebrity. And even the world governing politics is under a different vibration now, because, somebody like Donald Trump can get into power. Again, I'm not going to touch that guy's politics or whatever. That's a whole world, and I'm not here to do that. But I want everybody to consider that in this age, Trump got in while Pluto was in Capricorn. Something is happening where the individual collective masses of the people, through social media and through the power of telecommunication, there's not a grandfathering in of the president that happened with President Trump. And some people say this is for better or worse. All the presidents before Trump got grandfathered in there. My cat's going to try and get in here again. All the presidents before Trump got grandfathered in there, where it's a for better or worse thing again, because you got to be in the boys club, the boys club word, the American presidential boys club. And you probably, Lord knows what kind of, ass spanking with a paddle and, that sort of fraternity kind of stuff that presidents have always done before getting on top of, maybe you got to go through some kind of Freemasonry rite or something like that. I don't know. But whatever all that stuff is, if that has been going on, Trump made it through the gate, apparently based strictly on the impetus of the people. At a time when America was in very, very, very dire straits. So the typical thing that most presidential candidates would have to do before becoming president were, the media doesn't have that kind of control. The media outlets were all controlled by politicians who have the money at the time. But now with Facebook and with the internet, the information is free, which means anybody with a good enough smile and good enough luster and a good enough way to sell that steak can get out there and become the president of the United States. So it's a crazy thing to kind of think about how that has changed, or, the difference that represents in terms of the power of individual sovereignty, as I call it, and this Aquarian glimpse of individuality. So the sovereignty now is being put in the hands of individuals, like I said. It's being put in the hands of, and something is happening which I call light pollution, where, okay, let me put it to you this way. Like even music and culture is going through this dissemination. YouTube is an example of it, where everyone's here hanging out with me. I'm not some big movie production. I don't have money behind me. I'm just a guy with a camera and a good microphone. And people are listening to me, and I don't need big production in order for that to happen. Every individual has the ability to tap into this power structure of technology using the camera and the microphone and everything that we have. And this is what I mean when I say this light pollution. Again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I have to reckon with it. I'm a musician, and I was in a band, and I was trying to push my band for a long time. And it was very difficult because there's no infrastructure for a band these days. If I want to, to get famous like the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, all those old touring bands, that used to tour, and touring was so much easier. Even in the 80s and the 90s, people could tour, and there was an infrastructure that was there because people weren't on their phones as much. They wanted to buy a ticket and see the actual show live in person. Nowadays, a band trying to rev up fans in order to go on tour is difficult because people can just go on their phones and people can just go on their phones and oh, everybody still with me? My screen took a little bit of a freeze there, a bit of a tumble. Now the point is that in the starry sky, you can see all the stars out at night when you're at a cottage because there's no light from the city. The light from the city doesn't pollute the stars. Now imagine if every star out there, we can see every individual little one. And those are almost like celebrities and politicians. Thank you, Susie. Thank you for thank you for letting me know that you're still here. What's happening in today's times is there's a light pollution happening where everybody's a star. And when everybody's a star, no one's a star. So how is, anybody can drum up social power, social snap, by just going online and having the most convincing new variety of displaying information. That's why Venus is going to be a big part of today's time, wearing Venus on your lapel. Because if you're dressed in something nice, and if you dress the part and look the part, people are going to see it and hear it and sense it. Although you don't want to go so far that you look like a robot or anything like that. this is the way that things are going in today's time, where everyone is a star, which means that nobody is. So we're leading towards power being disseminated by a government, monarchical, capitalistic cabal, possibly. You know, if there was any Illuminati, lizard people, Freemasons ruling America, today's time represents a moment in time when anybody can go along and snatch the attention of the people. There's no grandfathering in like there used to be. Again, I would say Trump is a figure of this time. Not to say that he's a good one or a bad one, whatever. I'm not here to do politics. But again, he's definitely a placeholder for the figuration of the craziness that's happening in Pluto and Capricorn in America, leading towards Aquarius. You know? So the reason I'm saying all this is because what's happening is that the collective is giving this middle finger to the people in power. Now, how this is going to play out exactly, what's going to come from this, there's a neuroplastic, the paint is wet on how sovereignty, what that's going to mean in the world in the coming bit. And, you know, it's interesting to think about, especially in terms of places like that rule with an iron fist, like other parts of the world. I don't feel the need to name any names, but there are some nations that rule things with an iron fist. And such places might be aware that the paint is wet in other parts of the world where we are all affected by the planets in this strong way, because we have the freedom of, you know, the Western world has the freedom that it's always described. We have the freedom to, you know, we're still affected by the material governments and the governance of the world, but the free world is much more open to the play of the planets because we don't have any sort of dictator or tyrannical autocrat telling us, moving us through. When there is some kind of autocrat moving people through, the planets don't influence them as much because they can't. You know what I mean? Now, it's kind of an interesting thing to think about that while Saturn is conjuncting Neptune in Aries, the material world is going to have a difficult economic situation here. And there's going to be a difficult time for all of our pockets, for all of our finances, because there's going to be infrastructures melting, I think, at this time. There are certainly significations of this kind of thing happening, not just because Saturn is at the end of its cycle, it's dropping dead on the floor and needs to recharge itself by moving towards Libra again. And it's happening just as Neptune is in Aries. So something I do want to point out is that if the governing bodies of the world do astrology and they know that at this time the paint is going to be wet, it's going to be an important time for everybody to hold consciousness in a positive, constructive, communal way, especially because the tyrannical, autocratic players on the other side of the planet from me, such people are going to be aware when there's weakening happening in the world. And there could be some kind of big war movements that happen in this regard. I don't want to speak too much to this because it's something that we should all be aware of. Again, I'm a human. I'm a reflector in human design. I'm not going to try and project or manifest anything there, but I do want to speak to it. Because at this time, while Saturn and Neptune are together in Aries and the North Node is on Pluto and Aquarius, we are going to be giving this middle finger, particularly because the North Node is on Pluto in Aquarius. The kids have been feeling Saturn in Capricorn, and we're saying, you know what, screw you, mom and dad. So what's almost going to happen is if we're going to go out onto the street and we're going to try to live by ourselves outside of the typical government conglomerate corporatocracy that we've been living in. This could mean like, like instead of people, the ideas of Pluto and Aquarius are limitless. Like imagine us all, instead of, if we were working at a job, I work in retail, I sell weed at a weed shop. And imagine if all of me and my buddies at lunch, it was like, okay, we're going to close down the shop for an hour. We're all going to eat lunch together. We're going to have a communal kitchen where we all have organic vegetables and we're eating together. We're not going to go and pay our bid to vote for McDonald's by going and paying a McDonald's or some other fast food restaurant our hard-earned money to get sucked up into the capitalist thing in order to give us this crappy food. And we all do it individually at individual times so that work can keep happening. What if we all just came together and had food or something like that and made that happen in this Aquarian sort of way? This is what I mean when I say, the governing bodies right now are media outlets, are fast food, companies who have all the money. They put the sway on the politicians these days. This is how it works these days. I'm glad to see I've got a fellow reflector saying hello in the chat. Hello there, Angela, and everybody else who's hanging out. So, these kinds of themes of collective community things giving the middle finger to the typical government corporatocracy that we have known is kind of going to be talked about at this time. Just what's going to happen is that the people in power, these governing bodies, these who have always been shaking hands with the fast food companies and industries who have all the big money, all these people do not want this light pollution to happen. McDonald's wants to stand out. Wendy's, Gap, Walmart, these people want to stand out in the sky. They want to see the big yellow golden arches of McDonald's, no matter how many individual people are on their phones, lighting up the sky with this positive light pollution. So what that struggle is going to look like is a very interesting thing to think about. But what's most important to say is that at this time, while Saturn is in Aries, there will be some, I think, economic disparity. I think anybody can pretty much peg this. With Saturn being in Aries, there's usually, droughts of sorts can happen. Droughts of material commerce and things can happen. Here we go. Just in case, sorry that my computer gets stoppy like that. I think it just needs to catch up with itself once in a while. I guess it's because this is a long video. But we can see the difficulty that's going to be happening at this time. How this struggle is going to unfold is an interesting thing to think about. So while this is all happening, Saturn is in Aries. We are going to be trying to hold the bowl of the changing world of Pluto and Aquarius with the North Node in Aquarius, but we're going to be on shaky knees. So at some level, what really needs to be done is that we all need to start looking, in my opinion, within the energy bodies of yoga. This is partly what Neptune in this place. We can't necessarily say it's a bad thing. There will be a pressure here to let go of mom and dad's ways of being. And we know that the infrastructures that have been happening have all been ones that are material based, because this is very root chakra stuff. Now, the best way to deal with your root chakra is not just by focusing on your root chakra. When I say the root chakra, I mean Capricorn and Aquarius. The best way to deal with your root chakra is by having a syncretic mind that is also attached to all the chakras. So you don't just have too much strength in one place in the energy body, in the light body. So what will be good for us at this time, Neptune especially strongly represents this. Wherever Neptune and Saturn are in your chart at this time, in Aries, that's going to be a place where you're going to be feeling the pull of economic severity. And it's going to be a place where you can use your will, your solar plexus of Aries, the third chakra, You can use your will and apply it to a sacrifice that's very meaningful to you. And for all of us, this will at some level be a sacrifice of our addiction to the root chakra at Aquarius and the infrastructures of the world. Susie said it, big agra, big pharma, consumerism. We're going to be, that's all like root chakra stuff. That's like the gross side of Aquarius. Aquarius and Capricorn in the root chakra are not a bad thing. We need infrastructure. Again, amongst astrology people and hippie people, I will actually come off as being one of the more Saturnian than anybody can see. One of the reasons I have this organization of my mind and my thoughts in this presentation is because I have a very strong Saturn. I'm take that as you will. My Saturn is in Aquarius in the 7th house, and that's apparently where Saturn does well. So I got Saturn coming out of my ears in the Vedic understanding. And Saturn is a very good thing. Saturn gives us an infrastructure that will support what we're trying to do. And this is really with Pluto in Aquarius, that's what's trying to happen here, is that we're trying to develop a material world that is conducive to the spirituality that which Pluto is now moving up towards. It's moving from Aquarius to Pisces, 2nd chakra, Aries, 3rd chakra, Taurus, 4th chakra, Gemini, 5th chakra, Cancer, 6th chakra. It's moving up the chakras now. And this is what the world is transforming into. So there's going to be socialistic movements, there's going to be communistic movements and all these sorts of things in the coming decades as well. Now, that's its own thing. Politics are politics. The reason I'm bringing all this up is because while Saturn is with Neptune, there's going to be something happening here. It's going to be started in February 2025 when the North Node is with Neptune and Saturn in Pisces. There's going to be an incessant desire to really almost feel some kind of bliss. And really, we should all try at this point. Like, yoga people are really going to unfurl their wings at this time. People who are less into the varieties of sensation outside of the self and more into consolidating sensational attributes that are inherent inside the self for the sake of the bliss of the soul, for the sake of unfolding the inherent appetites natural to the soul, so that there's a soul ergonomics that's trying to happen at this time. Okay, imagine you've got a pair, scissors. Imagine a dog trying to use a pair of scissors. It can't. Scissors are made for the human hand. Scissors are almost like they're an instinctive ergonomic design. You ever heard that word before? It's like when they make chairs. Have you ever heard of an ergonomically designed chair? It's a chair that perfectly matches the natural spine of the human body in order to make it healthy. Ergonomical means it fits to the design of its user. When Neptune and Saturn are in Aries, there's going to be a deep, intense need for reality to come more from the inherent design of the whole human light energy body. And this is what Neptune's figuration kind of means here. Because, of course, Saturn coming up to Neptune is another cycle point. Each planet has its transiting cycles. And with Saturn, it's most particularly interesting because Saturn is the slowest moving planet in the 6th chakra system. It coming up to Neptune represents a new Neptune-Saturn cycle, and it's starting in Aries, where Saturn is debilitated. So there's going to be a grip on our will at this time. And it's going to be very important that all of us be objective and discerning about how our will can take us a little bit far ahead, and especially using our will in what is seated in 2025 when the North Node is in Pisces. There's going to be a deep desire and a feeling of wanting to get some kind of bliss out, like the OnlyFans of the world and the people who are just getting sex just to have the experience kind of thing. Like, not that any of that stuff is inherently bad, But if everybody on the planet just taps into that in a virtual space of just getting the deliciousness out in this virtual space, we are going to be out of our bodies and we won't be holding in our compulsions. It's okay to let your compulsions go, but we should be discerning about our sexual bodies throughout 2025 and 2026. And in 2027, we will have this willpower that needs to go somewhere. And the thing is that with Saturn conjunct Neptune in Aries, when there's economic despair, this is what the metaphor that I've cooked up is like. The kids are saying, fuck you, mom and dad. It's Pluto and Aquarius. We want a new governing system. So what's going to happen is McDonald's and Walmart and the governing bodies, and they're going to say, fine, go out in the world, whatever that means, and go and, whatever. Sovereignty is going to try to be this communal, people coming together thing. And what's going to happen is that because we've not all come together and done some kind of communal living thing for so long, it's going to be hard for us all to live in a communal situation. What's going to happen is that there will be times where people try to get communities together and things will happen that are spiritual based or under the auspices of spirituality. Stuff like Osho. Osho I think is a great guy, but he's an example of some wild shit that went down that really didn't have much to do with him. Yeah, I don't know. Again, it's one of those things. I'm intrigued by the character of Osho, and I love his writings. And I'm not sure about how I feel about the historicity of his story, where he had the FBI and people up his ass because he was trying to create a communal situation in America, and nobody liked that. It's its own whole thing. That's everyone kind of, a lot of people probably know that story. Now, stuff like this is going to be happening. And what's going to be tricky is that because Saturn is with Neptune in Aries, there's going to be almost something like a drug, like a street drug. In this narrative, in this metaphor, we're a kid saying, fuck you, mom and dad, to the old form of power. We want our new form of power. We want to strike out on our own through individual sovereignty for the collective. I often say this is an important metaphor or an important poetic thing I always say. It comes from something called Cosmic Sounds in the 1970s. It's a poem where it's a music album where they made music and they put poetry of the zodiac signs. And on the one on Aquarius, the poem is, in the opal light of Aquarius, all men can blend and still be what they are. It's a beautiful image, and it's a wonderful integration of the individual with the needs of the collective, because the self in one is the self in all. Now, what's going to be happening around this time when the individual sovereign gives the middle finger to the old ways of power? We're going to be striking it out on our own on the street, and there's going to be street drugs there. This is a cosmological metaphor here, folks. I don't know exactly what this means, but this is what's conveyed by Saturn being the dispositor of Pluto in Aquarius. Saturn is the dispositor of Pluto in Aquarius with the North Node there. And Saturn, being the dispositor of Aquarius, is meeting with Neptune, the escapist spiritual impulse, in Aries while it is having struggle and debilitation. There's going to be some kind of cosmological street drug there. And maybe drugs are going to be a part of this. I'm someone who advocates for the idea, just say KNOW to drugs. There are positive drugs that I think can do good things for people who have been traumatized. There's a lot of positive good that can come through the gate at this time in the realm of holistic medicinal entheogenic medicines and other types of plant medicines in general. Even TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, and other forms of like Ayurveda. traditional dietary medicines that are getting us out of the other way, which is technocratic medicine of today's time. There's going to be pressure, just like there's been pressure, to get the perfect drug, the perfect needle, the perfect pill that's going to take care of everybody's whole situation. And lots of people are going to be going for the bait, because Saturn's going to be in Aries, and they're going to be wishing that, oh, blessed Neptune is going to come along and be for their better interests. Let's pay attention to what happens at that time. You know, it's going to be a tricky thing, just like it was tricky in the last phase of the pandemic. So we don't know exactly what could happen at that time. But it's going to be important for everybody to pay attention. Whatever's mandated, at this point, I want this video to last, so I'm not going to make any claims on anything that you should do in times of government mandate. But what I do recommend is that we do our best to try to still have some kind of holistic connection to our diets, to our bodies. And so that when this bliss impulse of Neptune, whatever this cosmogonic street drug is going to do, you know, do yourself a favor in continuance of this metaphor and strive for psychedelic rather than, narcotic. Strive for a psychedelic mind expanding Neptune influence of Saturn and Aries, as opposed to a narcotic depressant Neptune with Saturn and Aries in a cosmological metaphor. Because, lots could happen at that time, and it's good for us to just pay attention to what might go on around that moment in time, right? So, this is going to be a very important time, February 2027 and 2028. These planetary formations are going to be the same for both of these years. There won't be relief until Saturn enters Taurus in April of 2028. Saturn leaves its debilitation in Aries, and it also leaves the vicinity of Neptune's sign conjunction. So it's no longer sharing its dispositor Mars. Because remember, at the end of, around February 2028, like Saturn will be pretty far away from Neptune at this point. But, so at this point, when Saturn is far away from Neptune, they're still working through the same dispositor, Mars. This is how the Vedic people think of it. Even if Neptune's at 1 degree and Saturn is at 29 degrees, anyone born at that point is still going to technically have them working through the same dispositor, which means the Vedic people still call that a conjunction. This is how Vedic conjunctions work. So in April of 2028, Saturn is going to come into Taurus, and it's much happier in Taurus. It's out of its debilitation point. This is really going to be a communal time of respite. Saturn is not with any outer planets, and it is feeling the relief of being freed from the grip of Neptune and its debilitation point. Saturn is friends with Venus, as I've already kind of said. So that is going to be a rejuvenating time for everything that's been happening. It's going to be the calm really after the storm. And it's really 2026, really 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028. It's going to be a strange time. By April of 2028, though, it's going to be hugely relieved when Saturn enters Taurus for everybody. Now, in 2029, there will be eclipses in Capricorn. And Pluto is still working through Saturn as the dispositor. So this won't be nearly as bad as 2026, 2027, or nearly as heavy, but there will be still Saturnian stuff happening, really, until the North Node enters Sagittarius in September of 2029. at which point the Uranus will be with the south node, and they'll be trine Pluto. Now, this leads us to a very interesting point. This is when, by the way, I've been talking about all this stuff, and I'm going to be going through these all these things in December. What am I trying to say? December 11th in a week from now. I'm going to go through all of this for each person's rising sign. Now, Saturn is going to join Uranus and the South Node in Gemini in June of 2030. And that's going to last for a while. The nodes won't get out of this axis until April 2031. So this is going to be an interesting manifestation of all things Plutonian and Saturnian. Saturn meeting with the South Node. The South Node is a letting go, right? The South Node, whenever anything touches the South Node, it's a time of letting go. And so really the South Node is having this letting go consciousness, although it's a letting go that you have to focus on. The nodes are always a point of manifestation. This will be a point where whatever Gemini is in your chart, whatever planets are there, this will be an important settling period where Saturn is getting back on its feet and it's starting to build the new world. The paint is becoming less wet at this time in history. So at the beginning of the 2030s decade, it will be a relief, but at the same time, there will be fights to fix the picture to the way people want it to be before the paint becomes completely dry from that crazy period in 2026, 2027. So this will be an important period here, and it's going to relate to Uranus and Gemini. And there will be a desire to enact Sagittarian things at this time. So that's an interesting period to look at. Really, your rising sign is going to depict ultimately what kind of happens here, because the individuals will all take this differently than the collective. Now, this is the last thing I want to point to in this presentation, folks. Pluto, this is May of 2035. In May of 2035, Saturn comes into Leo, and Saturn's going to be opposite Pluto. There's lots to talk about here, because what's happening is that the dispositor of Pluto in Aquarius is going to be opposite Pluto in Aquarius. So really what's kind of going on there is that there's this interesting sort of phenomenon happening. Have I got this right? I just realized that these nodes are switched. That sucks. I should have changed that, but as we can see here, in 2035, the North Node is going to be in Leo. So the North Node at this point is in Virgo. And Saturn is in Leo here in May of 2035. So there is this conversation going on between Pluto in Aquarius and Saturn in being opposite Aquarius. Now, this is what I want to say at this point, is that all this stuff that's been happening with sovereignty throughout this whole period, even after 2026, 2027, what's going to be happening is the kid is still going to be giving the middle finger to mom and dad. Pluto is still going to be wreaking havoc on Aquarius from the perspective of the old systems of power and infrastructure. And at this time, what's going to be happening is that when Saturn is opposite Aquarius, this is when the individual within the collective starts to be important. And this is what I think is going to happen here, folks, is that we as a collective are all going to have to work together to deal with Pluto and Aquarius, especially in these first beginning bits, especially when Saturn is with Neptune in the sign of Aries. We all have to work together around this time. And what's going to be happening is that there's going to be a lot of collective, communal organizations that are coming together to uproot the old infrastructures of power. in order to develop this individual sovereignty. And this is going to be happening in 2029, 2030, 2031, 32, all the way up to 2035. It's in 2035 that I think, folks, what's going to happen is that Saturn is going to say, all right, enough's enough. We will all have been working on what I think is a communal coming together. And particularly, there's going to be a strong manifestation point. Yes, this does all happen in this way. The South Node is going to join Pluto again in Aquarius in December of 2035. And the North Node is going to be with Saturn in Leo. Now, we know that Saturn is its own slow, dragging manifestation point. This is going to be opposite Aquarius at this time. What this means is that Saturn is far away from its initiating point of Aquarius, its own sign. What's going to be happening at this time is that each one of us as individuals will have been pitching in to have a collective Aquarian individual sovereignty. Aquarius is going to take a slow build of a root chakra, folks. We know how the root chakra is. It's a slow, long, patient endurance in Pluto's, forays in Aquarius. It's a slow, long, patient process. And the ramifications of this are going to be relevant for the next 250 years cycle, of course. Now, at this particular time in 2035, its dispositor Saturn has gone from Aquarius in 2035. Now it's in Leo. What's going to happen at this point? It's going to be tough because Saturn doesn't like Leo. Remember when I showed us this little picture here where we can see that the groupings of the planets. Saturn rules an air and earth sign. Mercury rules air and earth. Venus rules air and earth. These three are friends, and they tend to not get along with the planets on this other side, Sun and Moon, Mars, and Jupiter. The Sun and Saturn are sworn enemies, and this is reflected in the fact that that Aquarius, anciently ruled by Saturn, and the Sun, ruled by Leo, are opposite each other. These two hate each other. Saturn does not get along well with the Sun. Now, what usually happens, is natally speaking, if these two are conjunct, the stronger planet will always evade and erode the weaker planet. If you have Aquarius and the Sun conjunct in Aquarius, if you have Saturn and the Sun conjunct in Aquarius, Saturn wins because it's a Saturn rule sign, and the Sun is not strong in Aquarius. If you have the Sun conjunct Saturn in Aries, the Sun wins because the Sun is exalted and Saturn is debilitated. Note that their debilitations are flipped. Saturn's exalted in Libra, the Sun is exalted in Aries. So if you have the Sun and Saturn conjunct in Libra, Saturn wins because Saturn's exalted, it's got strength, and the Sun is debilitated. That's how these two roll. So when we have this period when Saturn is in the sign of Leo, it's not Saturn's favorite place. It's also going to have a tough time when Saturn's in Cancer. Essentially, any time Saturn is in an enemy sign is going to be difficult, especially because Pluto is in Aquarius right now. So when Saturn gets to Leo, what we have happening is that Saturn has been waltzing through the zodiac. It's been going from, the root chakra. Right now in 2022, it's in the root chakra of Aquarius. 2023, it's going to get to the second chakra of Pisces. By 2026, it's going to be in Aries, the third chakra. By 2028, it's going to be in Taurus, the fourth chakra. By 2030, it's going to be in Gemini, the fifth chakra. By 2032, 2033, it's going to be in Cancer, the sixth chakra. Now Saturn is going to be in Leo in December of 2035 at the sixth chakra. Cancer and Leo are both the sixth chakra. And when it's in Leo, what's happening is that before it gets to Leo, we will all have been developing on the, going from matter up to the spirit, right? We're coming from the bottom, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, all the way to the top. And it's going to be in a communal collective. So while we're all kind of working together. Now, when Saturn reaches Leo, what's happening is that Saturn is manifesting its fall to Capricorn. The spirit of the 6th chakra is falling to the 1st chakra of Capricorn, which means at this time, we will all be sick of working on letting go of ourselves in order to be helping the collective evolution. So when Saturn is in Leo, in the sign, Saturn's in the sign of Leo, with the North Node especially. The North Node shows where we're going. The South Node shows where we've been. This is going to be the time where we're letting go of Pluto and Aquarius and saying, we have worked at this collective thing at the expense of our individual freedom as an individual. We are working on a system where the sovereigns are the individuals and the infrastructure caters to the individual. We still need to build that infrastructure. When Saturn begins in Aquarius in 2022, like it is now, it's moving towards Leo. It's coming from the bottom to the top, while Pluto is there in Aquarius. Saturn is going to be coming to this place of the individual, and the whole time it's carrying this infrastructure. It's changing the Pluto and Aquarius infrastructure, so we all have sovereignty. We all have to let go of the mom and dad of the old infrastructures. We have to cut them off and carry the individual sovereignty together, at least up until 2035, at which point, when Saturn meets in Leo, it's going to meet with the North Node. It's going to be letting go of what happened in the last few years and saying, now I'm going to start taking advantage of what we've built collectively as a lifestyle that serves the sovereign individual. In 2035, it's almost like we're building a well, folks. Aquarius relates with wells. If you look up Aquarius in Vedic astrology, it's a well digger. It's the individuals are all coming together to build a well. So now we all, because back in the old days, each person would have to go to the river, get their own little bucket of water, and then carry it to their home. And then that would go bad eventually. And it was a long way from the river to our home. So what happened is the Aquarian thing was that we built a well where we all worked together, digging this well that was close to home. The only way it would happen is if we all did it together. But now that we've built the well, we all individually can take from it. And it serves the individual to help build this thing that's collectively for the individual. That's what's happening from 2027 till about 2035. Then in 2035, the well will be built. At least we will start to feel like our individual spirit is now something that we need to work on, because that's what Saturn represents. I often say when Saturn is transiting any sign or house, it's transiting there because what that means is that it's not that this Saturn influence, the Death Star Darth Vader is finally come to this point in us. It's like going to the bathroom. Why do we go to the bathroom? Is it because Saturn has appeared in the sky at 12 o'clock? No, it's because we ate something 18 hours ago and it's moved through and we haven't gone to the bathroom in this many hours. This is what it means when Saturn is visiting a sign or a house. We haven't dealt with that thing in 27 years, essentially, because that's how long Saturn takes to go around the zodiac. We're going to the bathroom in that regard. Saturn very much relates with excretion of waste, of the material things, getting it all out. Saturn visiting there means you're going to the bathroom and dealing with whatever it is that you haven't dealt with regard to what it's touching by sign, by natal planet, and by house. Right? So whatever Leo means in your chart is a particular individuality that you have. It's your personal kingdom. It's the sun. It's your rulership. It's what you are doing here. And Aquarius is the system that you need to abide by in order that you can be the individual Leo. Now, in 2035, we're all going to have had enough of building the sovereignty that we've all been building, which means in 2035, it's time for us all to start thinking spiritually about Leo and Cancer and the sixth chakra, and starting to think of how my individuality can shine and be redeemed within the well that we've all finally built. Now I can live my life. Now I can actually be an individual within the collective like this whole thing was supposed to be. Right? That's what's going to happen around this important time. And it will be quite the show as it comes along, ladies and gentlemen. So, this went about as long as I thought it would, there's a lot to cover in regards to all this. I've really just taken on everything that I could in terms of the collective, in terms of what I kind of see happening to the collective. Now, I'm going to be talking on December 11th about what I think is going to be happening to each individual rising sign as all of these kind of come along. Now, I'm going to give a little gumball of what Pluto and Aquarius means in general in a cookbook way, and what Neptune and Aries means to your sign in a cookbook way in that video as well. You don't got to catch it live, but just so those who are watching, I always love hanging out with you live. But it's going to be on my channel, and you're going to see it, and it's going to be that. So, for now, it's been a long go. I think I might be able to go. My girlfriend is hanging out with her dad, and I love hanging out with them two together. So I'm going to see if I have enough time to hang out with them. I think I've still got enough time at this moment for any questions. If anybody has any thoughts, anything they'd like to ask in regards to at least collective things that I've spoken to here. If anybody wants to leave in this live comments or in a comment on the video, let me know things that you would like to particularly speak to. I would say my friend Teresa already asked one question at the start. She asked, hopefully she's still here, she asked what it means that Pluto in Aquarius is going to be opposite the Pluto in Leo generation. The Pluto in Leo generation is going to be, the baby boomers are going to have to deal with their Pluto opposition if they're old enough and if they are still kicking and they can experience this, which will basically mean that the Pluto in Leo is at the manifestation point of individuality. They all remember, man, back in the day when beer was so much cheaper, you could go to the bar and you get a beer for $2. You can get a beer for $3. You could drink for $50 all night. Rent was cheaper, and you could go and see a show, and there were better music in the time. And they're not wrong about all that, that's a lot of stuff that was going in Pluto and Leo is about the individual spirit manifesting into creation, and the doors were open for that at that time. What they have to face right now is that people are now moving into a collective apprehension of how to deal with the way the world is unfolding materially, and they have to deal with what's unfolding materially in order to still keep their individuality, because those people are important. The baby boomer generation, especially the wise ones, and there are wise ones from that generation, they're going to be very important in teaching all of us. They are not going to let go, and I'm not going to polarize anybody here, because the baby boomers are actually going to be very important to us. The ones who are unevolved are going to stop Pluto in Aquarius from coming through and evolving. But the Pluto and Leo people who are evolved souls are going to invite us to see beyond the astral transits. And they are going to invite us to see the individual sovereignty of the sixth chakra in all of us manifesting with wisdom and truth, while the material world, the paint becomes wet in the material world, and everything is dissolving. The whole material world is dissolving. The Pluto and Leo people are going to roll their shoulders back, and they're still going to be dancing. They're still going to be shaking their maraca and getting the individual human experience out. If they are evolved, and they've got a lot to deal with in this coming time as leaders and as people, as elders. They're going to have an important role to play. So I hope that that gives a good answer to Teresa for what she had asked in that regard. So I have another friend here, Jules, who has asked for book recommendations on Pluto. I don't have it on me. Do I? I'd never be able to find it, but I do certainly have a particular book on Pluto that I would recommend to everybody. My place is a mess right now. Yeah, I'll never find it, but the book I was looking for, Jeffrey Wolf Green, Jules. You just nailed it, my friend. Took the words right out of my mouth. Jeffrey Wolf Green is the best guy on Pluto that I've found. He's an evolutionary astrologer, does wonderful work on natal Pluto astrology. Now, another book that has some pretty cool, interesting takes on things is Astrology, A Cosmic Science by Isabel M. Hickey. She really even gives these descriptions of Pluto in the signs. Unfortunately, when she wrote this, she had given Pluto in the signs from Gemini through Scorpio, because she just didn't think that far into the future. It's very interesting in that regard. So that wouldn't be as useful to Pluto and Aquarius, but there's great work with regard to what Pluto is all about in Astrology, A Cosmic Science by Isabel M. Hickey. The last book I would say is a very good Pluto book, even more than Isabel M. Hickey. I should have mentioned this first. It's a book by a guy named Stephen Arroyo. It's Astrology, Karma, and Transformation. That is the best book that I know of for reading into what the outer planets are all about. Takes it from a Jungian perspective, and it's really very, very wonderful. So, I'm glad everybody's been enjoying this. I'm glad to see everybody here. Michelle, Michael Gregory, Jules, Mia Moore, Stellar Yoga Arts, Cosmic Rose, Susie Underwood, Four Blessings, you've been saying a lot around here, AKB727, Izzy C. We've had quite a few people hanging out with us here. Pluto, Saturn, Uranus, and Teresa, my friend, was hanging out with me at the early part of this video. I really appreciate you all. It was a real good time doing this. Stay tuned next week. Hopefully it's not going to take too long, but we are going to move through what Saturn's dealings, at least up to from Saturn in Aquarius all the way up to Saturn in Leo in 2035, as relates to Pluto and Aquarius for all 12 rising signs. I'm going to do my best. I've got a party the night before. I'm going to get all the sleep that I can. I'll wake up, and we're going to rock and roll. All right, folks? So thanks so much for hanging out with me here, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. I really liked doing this with you guys. Hope to see